is known as our mastoid process. This is a very large bony attachment for multiple muscles. A couple that you might recognize would be sternocleidomastoid from the anterior heading towards that, and then coming in from the back is going to be splenius capitis. As I rotate, this is again the mastoid process looking from an inferior view. Just inside of that is our mastoid notch. So we have our posterior digastric coming out of this notch and heading forward towards the highway bone. We have a mastoid foramen right inside this location here. And just kind of to the posterior, this isn't really named in all posterior nuchal line of the occipital bone and the suture kind of meeting point in asterions right in this location, and they call this the mastoid area. Okay, as I head anterior from the mastoid, I'm going to be entering into an opening. Now this is actually typically fully open, but in the scope's closed, but this is your external acoustic meatus or external auditory meatus. This is the outer ear opening, so your ear hole, so your ear's covering over top of that. Inferior and more deep to that, we have this styloid process that's pointing out. This is going to be for stylohyoid muscle. And then beginning into this zygomatic arch, which the zygomatic arch is better represented by looking down on it. And so we can see that this is an arch away from the skull itself. And the posterior part of that zygomatic arch is the temporal bone, specifically this zygomatic process, reaching towards the zygomatic bone. And I'm just going to pull the mandible down. So I pulled the head of the mandible out, and this is our mandibular fossa of the temporal bone, which is for the head or condyle, depending on what you want to call it, of the mandible going up in there. And that is for our, obviously, this action occurring at the temporal mandibular joint. And the last thing I'm going to point out on this arch, this bump right here is known as the articular tubercle. So as you open your mouth, we have this component and a secondary movement forward. So we have all this rolling and then this anterior translation or glide. So as you start to open your mouth, but then fully open your mouth, it's not going to go that far, but this is known as the articular tubercle, which helps with opening and closing between a disc and the head of the mandible there. So this is the zygomatic arch as a full part versus this is the zygomatic process of the temporal bone.